So thank you all for coming tonight to attend this lecture. I hope you'll find it profitable. I've already had at least 4 jokes about whether this was actually written by ChatGPT or not. Okay? And that is indeed a worry, right? I want to just start by especially thanking those of you who do support us at Bethlehem College and Seminary. It is our deepest desire and our privilege to spread a passion for the supremacy of Christ in all things to the joy of all peoples. And I hope you're going to get a small glimpse of that tonight in talking about this topic. So let me read a short Bible verse, pray, and then jump into it. Genesis chapter 2, verse 7 records, "The Lord formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living creature." Let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you, God, that you go before us. There's nothing we have to fear. So we thank you, Lord, that even though there's a lot of scary things about this topic, and there are things that truly we should be worried about, nevertheless, we know that these are all sovereign in your hands. And so we ask that you give us wisdom how to think about them clearly and give us courage to live faithfully for you in light of these things. It's your name that we pray, Lord Jesus. Amen. So what exactly is artificial intelligence, or AI? You may be surprised to learn that this term has been around for over 70 years. Okay? It was actually officially launched at a college, Dartmouth College, in 1956 at a small academic conference. That's where the term first made its advent into the world. It was coined for those technologies that might be developed, so those scientists at this conference hoped, that would eventually replicate and excel human rational capacities. For decades, this hope has been worked toward, primarily within academic fields, technological research, and of course in works of science fiction. But a year ago, this very month, AI left the field of speculation and theory and became a reality for many of us. In November of 2022, the company OpenAI launched for free use online the program ChatGPT. How many have used it? Oh yeah. It's short for Chat Generative Pre-trained Transformer, which is considered a prototype artificial intelligence chatbot. Upon its release, it quickly garnered public attention for its ability to provide incredibly detailed responses and very articulate answers to a whole range of questions and requests. Though GPT is still the most well-known AI technology today, you can find many others online already as well, and those are free too. Moreover, types of AI technology are already constantly being added to a whole host of technologies we already use, such as various services on Google and things like Amazon's Alexa and Apple's Siri. But with the advent of these new technologies, a whole host of questions and concerns have arisen, and not just for Christians. Instances of this can be observed in the regulations for AI that are quickly passing and arising not only in America but across the globe. There have been a number of laws passed in over 100 countries now, and that mandate various strategies for AI development. Most of the European Union countries have released AI strategies, as have Canada, China, India, Japan, Russia, Saudi Arabia, the Arab Emirates, and Vietnam. Others are currently laboring to come up with their own AI strategies, like Bangladesh, Malaysia, and Tunisia. In June 2020, the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence was launched, stating a need for AI to be developed in accordance with human rights and democratic values, and to ensure public confidence and trust in this technology. And people as varied from Elon Musk all the way to Henry Kissinger have called for the U.S. government to bring about a commission to regulate AI. All these government strategies and strategic initiatives towards AI seem to be a response to public worries. For example, in a 2022 Ipsos survey, only 35% of Americans agreed that AI might have more benefits than drawbacks. In 2023, a Reuters Ipsos poll found that 61% of Americans agree that AI poses significant risks to humanity. And in 2023, a Fox News poll said 76% of Americans thought it very important or somewhat important for the federal government to regulate AI. So it's clear that the general public has, to say the least, a growing dis-ease about the implications of this technology. Online, one could find many articles and videos addressing various possible misuses, abuses, and other worrisome implications. Some of these worries are already coming to the fore. I recently watched an online recorded debate concerning the Palestine-Israel conflict between Ben Shapiro and students at Oxford Union. What I found interesting that the participants regularly conditioned their claims based upon reports found online with the phrase, quote, assuming this isn't generated by AI. In a recent lecture by mathematician, biochemist, or bioethicist and Christian apologist John C. Lennox, he noted that some families are actually developing strategies to protect them against possible AI scams. He claims that we're not that far off from a time a family may get a phone call from someone they assume is a family member, but who happens to actually be traveling abroad, but asking for money in the midst of some tragedy. Unbeknownst to the family members, they may actually be receiving a phone call from an AI simulation. Given this possibility, some families are coming up with safe words that only the family members know, so that when such a call might be received, the family members will be able to tell if it is indeed that person because of his or her use or absence of the use of the safe word. And it should go without saying that families that pursue this strategy better not discuss it in front of any of their current technology. Okay? These sort of skepticism-inducing worries about what are often called deep fakes are often just the tip of the iceberg, though. AI pushed farther, many worry that AI's ability is going to simply outsource or simply replace humans altogether. How many human jobs are going to eventually be replaced by these emerging AI technologies? For example, the commercial trucking industry predicts that within 30 years, we'll probably only have fully robotic semi-trucks on the road, eliminating the need for human drivers altogether. And even more terrifying is the seemingly science fiction scenario of AI technologies concluding on their own that human beings are simply superfluous to whatever task is at hand. Is James Cameron, Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator franchise more realistic than we would like to believe? Well, perhaps. But in short, it is indeed a pressing question whether artificial intelligence could truly replace human intelligence. So getting to the point of my talk this evening, what does it mean to be human in an age of AI? I want to begin getting at this question by first investigating what exactly is artificial intelligence. Hopefully with clarifying that, I'll give some reasons to question whether any technology could possibly be considered intelligent as we apply it to human beings. And then I want to go on and make a case that AI is only the latest step in a long trend that we should seek to counter. As already noted, AI was invented with the term in the mid-1950s. And again, it was proposed as a concept encapsulating the hope that technologies could eventually be developed that replicate and excel human rational capacities. But haven't computers been doing that for a while? I mean, my laptop and my cell phone do quite a few things a lot better than I can, okay? Nevertheless, such devices are not usually considered artificially intelligent. The ability to do things faster or even better than humans doesn't seem to be sufficient to capture the notion of artificial intelligence. Okay, so what does? In a famous paper published in 1950, a few years before the term artificial intelligence was invented, the late mathematical genius Alan Turing argued that the question, can a machine think, should actually be replaced with the following question. Can a machine be linguistically indistinguishable from a human being? Specifically, Turing proposed a test now famously called the Turing test. In this test, human beings judge between answers received from another person and those from a computer. But the person doesn't know which ones are which. Turing theorized that if on the strength of returned answers, the person can do no better than 50-50 when delivering a verdict as to which was which, we could then say that the computer in question has passed the Turing test, and thus, according to Turing, we could say that that machine was indeed thinking. Now, all of us here have probably had experiences with online chatbots, and most of us, most of the time, know that we can distinguish it from an actual human being. Nevertheless, there's been various psychological studies done with different computer technologies that have actually passed the Turing test. In other words, we have plenty of clear examples where people cannot tell the difference between a real human and from a computer. Nevertheless, most AI theorists do not think the Turing test is sufficient to prove that something has artificial intelligence. And this is even for certain very focused areas where machines have clearly outperformed human minds. For example, famously in 1997, IBM's computer Deep Blue prevailed in a chess match over the then chess superstar Garry Kasparov. But even such a feat as this was not considered a true example of artificial intelligence. Why not? Most AI theorists argue that Deep Blue's quote-unquote intelligence did not really beat Kasparov, but rather the human intelligence of the programmers and the intelligence of the various chess master strategies that were also programmed into Deep Blue are what actually beat Kasparov. But since all computers need to be originally programmed by people, what could count as a truly artificial intelligent computer? What are AI theorists looking for? Well, it seems to be something like this. Whereas many types of computer programs can exhibit high expertise in a particular area they've been programmed to do, human intelligence seems to have a capacity for cultivating and learning expertise in virtually any area. To contrast, for example, if it were announced to Deep Blue that chess was no longer going to be the game of choice, but we were going to change the game of chess and add an additional rule that's not part of regular chess. And let's just make up one. Let's say the knight can now attack sideways like a pawn. Let's just say we added that rule to chess. If that new rule was added to the regular rules, Deep Blue would be easily trounced by a human child of average intelligence and little chess expertise. Deep Blue is only capable of playing regular chess well. But compare this example with another actual computer program that was developed in 2015 called AlphaGo, which was only programmed with the rules of the game Go. Are you familiar with that game? I've never played it. I've seen it played. It's like these little black and white marbles or chips, something like checkers or chess. I don't quite understand it, okay? But it's a game. And AlphaGo was programmed just with the rules, okay? Unlike Deep Blue was actually given strategies of chess, AlphaGo was only given the rules of Go, okay? But AlphaGo was programmed to perform simulations of the game with itself, such that it could learn from the methods that were most successful at winning the game. And I don't know exactly how long this took. I think it was just a matter of a few days or weeks. But on this basis, AlphaGo was able to eventually beat very skilled Go masters, human beings. And this, claim computer scientists, was a successful example of true AI. So the term artificial intelligence, broadly conceived, seems to be something like this. It's any technology that exhibits the ability to basically program itself, and thus furthers its abilities from what it was originally programmed to do by human beings. In essence, AI is learning technology. And given the speed of computing power today and the ability to access extremely large amounts of information, AI technologies now seem to be a reality. And so AI theorists are comfortable with calling such technologies artificially intelligent. But are things like ChatGPT actually intelligent? Are such technologies truly capable of thought? I think by investigating this a little further, it will help us enlighten a few things about it. To understand why AI technologies are called intelligent, I think we should first seek to understand what being a computer amounts to. A computer, any computer, at its most basic, is simply a machine that operates according to mathematical functions. A mathematical function is simply a set operation such that when it receives some data, called an input, it is organized or programmed to then export some further data, called an output. Thus, a computer is simply a machine that when it receives inputs of certain data, it then delivers certain programs outputs of data based upon those inputs and its internal makeup. The more advanced the computer is, the more functions it can perform, and the more it can do at the same time. However, as modern computing became faster and more varied in its abilities, especially in the 1950s, philosophers of mind began to see the computer as a model for theorizing about human rationality and how human intelligence works. The model of human rationality is often called functionalism. And it seems to me that the concept of AI is only conceivable on the basis of believing that a human mind is nothing more and ultimately nothing other than a computer, a function machine. Before making that connection, let me first explain how the functionalist theory of mind goes. For the functionalist, it is thought that any internal human state can be exhaustively described in terms of sensory inputs and behavioral outputs. Let's take an example. A functionalist might claim that the internal mental state that we normally call pain is nothing more than the internal state of exhaustively being explained by a functional role. Let's make up one. We'll call it F. The functional role F says the following. When certain tissue is damaged or affected, say by a needle prick, this input causes the organism to do a certain output, namely say ouch or grimace or some such reaction. Thus, according to the functionalist, an organism is in the mental state of pain if and only if it's in a state characterized by this functional role that I just dubbed F. Now, it's important to note here on the functionalist conception, human mental states are not known through first personal awareness, which seems like the intuitive common sense way to think about it. But according to functionalism, one does not know or feel pain. At best, those kind of words are simply shorthand for just describing functionalist mental states. According to the functionalist, any mental state is only and completely constituted by these causal relations of corresponding inputs and certain outputs, bodily and otherwise. So according to functionalism, there's nothing more than that to a mental state than this. And as already stated, functionalism is indeed how computers do indeed operate. For example, a computer can be programmed for the following, such that when it receives the input of a 2 and a plus and a 3 and an equal, its function to output a 5, let's say on a digital screen. A functionalist theorist of mind might even go so far as to say that this computer is in the mental state of thinking 2 plus 3 equals 5. Why believe that? Because, according to the functionalist, an internal state is exhaustively described in terms of its functional role of inputs and output. And that's all the internal state of a computer is, and by implication, that's all the internal state of a human mind is. Now again, computers are indeed function machines, but why would one think that a human mind works like this? Well, if one's a physicalist, that is, if you believe everything's physical, and there's no such thing like souls or spiritual-like entities, then functionalism is an incredibly attractive picture about how to think about human rationality. The physicalist functionalist believes the mind is just a physical machine of inputs and outputs, and thus there's no need to appeal to spiritual stuff like a soul or a mind. Furthermore, and this brings it back to the hope of AI technology, if natural human intelligence is just what the physical foundationalist view says it is, then it makes it very plausible that the idea of a highly advanced enough and sufficiently versatile enough computer technology could exhibit artificial intelligence. For if human rationality is simply constituted by functions like a computer, then the functionalist reasons that an incredibly fast enough learning computer or computer program would actually be intelligent, even though artificially made. Now, I think there's a whole host of problems with this functionalist understanding of intelligence or rationality, and by implication, for the conception of human rationality as well. And I think there's many ways that it should be critiqued, including by biblical and theological argumentation. But as a philosopher, I'm going to give what I believe is one very damning philosophical critique that shows human intelligence must be constituted by more than just functional states. So again, according to functionalism, though stated a little bit differently, if a computer or a robot is able to imitate a human being by embodying the right functional state, then that machine is supposed in the exact or highly similar mental state. But that seems intuitively wrong, even to many non-Christians. Why? Well, if you programmed a robot to say ouch when you took a needle and hit its shell, it surely seems implausible to say, oh, that computer is in the same mental state of pain as you and I would be. Okay? So based upon that intuition, a secular philosopher by the name of John Searle has developed an argument called the Chinese room argument in order to show that functionalism cannot be correct, and thus, I would argue, can't be a philosophical means of claiming a piece of technology is intelligent either. Here's how the Chinese room argument goes. Searle asks us, imagine you're locked in a room, and in that room are several baskets full of Chinese symbols. Imagine that you, like me, don't understand a word of Chinese, but that you're given a rule book in English for manipulating the Chinese symbols. The rules specify the manipulations of symbols purely formally, in terms of syntax, not semantics. So a rule might say, take a squiggle out of basket number 1 and put it next to a squoggle sign in basket number 2. Now suppose that some other Chinese symbols are passed to you from into the room outside. You're in the sealed room, you're just getting these pieces of paper, and there's Chinese symbols on it. And you're given further rules for passing back Chinese symbols back out of the room. And suppose that unknown to you, says Searle, that the symbols passed in to you are actually Chinese questions. And you also don't know that the Chinese symbols that you're passing back out are actually answers to those questions. And suppose further that the programmers are so good at designing the programs, and you are so good at manipulating these symbols, that very soon your answers are indistinguishable from those of a native Chinese speaker. He says, there you are, locked in your room, shuffling your Chinese symbols back and forth. Now he says the point of the story is this. By virtue of implementing a formal computer program from the point of view of an outside observer, you behave exactly as if you understood Chinese. But all the same, you don't understand a word of Chinese. So Searle's example shows that understanding Chinese or any natural language is a mental state that's qualitatively different from, that is over and above, a simple functional state of knowing how to give the right linguistic output upon giving certain linguistic input. And though this argument is specifically about language, the mental state of understanding a language, it generalizes to all internal states as well as pain. For example, if people outside the room input a set of Chinese symbols, again, you don't know what they say, but translated into English, they would say, you are stupid and we don't like you. And you, taking the rule book, put the Chinese answer out, and the Chinese answer actually translates, I am hurt by your comment. We obviously would not believe that the person inside the room was genuinely in a mental state of pain, even though they gave the response you would expect from that input. We all know that feeling pain or having our feelings hurt is more than just giving the right kind of response. So Searle's thought experiment illustrates that human intelligence must be more than simple inputs and outputs, simple functional states. Thus, which constitutes the workings of a computer. Thus, the speed and varied applicability of extremely complicated programs like ChatGPT should not seriously be called intelligent, at least in any sort of qualitative way as used as describing human intelligence. And this is just not a Christian critique, as the naturalist John Searle just showed, but a further example, Jaron Lanier, a well-known computer scientist who actually coined the term virtual reality, said in a recent piece in The New Yorker, quote, there is no AI. As a computer scientist, I don't like the term AI. In fact, I think it's misleading, even a little dangerous. Everybody's already using the term, and it may seem a little late in the day to be arguing about it, but we're at the beginning of a new technological era, and the easiest way to mismanage a technology is to misunderstand it, end quote. So technologies like ChatGPT are amazing tools that clearly exhibit evidence of intelligence because they're made by truly intelligent beings, namely human beings made in the image of God, and in turn reflect His rationality in some mysterious way. But computing technologies, regardless of how advanced or versatile they are in learning or application, do not qualitatively exhibit human intelligence. Though functional states may imitate human intelligence in terms of reactions to inputs, genuine intelligence is more than this. And claiming such is like claiming that when a person reflects their arm being raised in a mirror, they can say the mirror is actually raising its arm as well. But clearly, the mirror is not. So this new technology, which we call artificial intelligence, should not really be considered genuine human intelligence or actual intelligence, even though we were probably stuck with the term AI. Nevertheless, as noted earlier, there's still much more that's concerning about this new technology. And much of the information widely available online today addresses various possible uses and misuses of it. This, like the deepfake problem that I referred to earlier. But that being the case, I don't propose to add anything further to that discussion here tonight, though all those sort of things are important too. Rather, I want to try and answer the question, what does it mean to be human in this age of AI? And in doing so, I want to highlight and warn us against a perspective and a disposition which I believe we've all inherited concerning technology in general, and which most of us are still problematically continuing to perpetrate. What exactly am I warning against here? The essayist and novelist Wendell Berry says the following, quote, what I am against, and without a minute's hesitation or apology, is our slovenly willingness to allow machines and the idea of the machine to prescribe terms and conditions on the lives of creatures, which we have increasingly allowed for the last 2 centuries, and are still allowing at an incalculable cost to other creatures and to ourselves. He goes on to note, quote, "It is easy for me to imagine that the next generation of the world will be between people who wish to live as creatures and people who wish to live as machines," end quote. What's Barry getting on about here? Well, he seems to be stating his opposition to something which he claims we've been allowing for over 2 centuries now. What exactly have we allowed? Barry asserts that we have taken on a type of slovenly willingness, a careless and negligent readiness of allowing machines, or better, generally technology, to prescribe the terms and conditions of our lives as creatures. If that's so, is Barry against technology? Is he suggesting we adopt an Amish type of existence? I don't think so. And if I'm understanding him correctly, he's not so much putting up a resistance toward technology per se, but towards a certain long-standing attitude and disposition about technology, which he believes, and I'll argue for here tonight, has negative consequences for our lives as human beings, made in the image of God, and how God designed us to flourish. So what is this attitude towards technology that Barry's recommending us to be against? Before attempting to explain it, let me first note that Barry's position is not new at all. Intellectuals, including Christian intellectuals, have been seen this as a problematic thing for quite a while now and have been warning against it. In Alan Jacobs' book, The Year of Our Lord, 1943, he reports that there was a dominant theme among many pre-World War II intellectuals, including Christian intellectuals, who determined that to understand the coming war primarily in moral rather than military and technical terms. Why? Because, as these intellectuals saw it, the emerging Axis powers were primarily built upon their engineering, military, and political might. But interesting, notes Jacobs, by 1943, the fear had reversed its polarities, and intellectuals publicly worried that the victory of the Allies, that was all but wholly inevitable by that point, would be a consequence, or be held to be a consequence, of their superior technology, engineering, and manufacture. A case of might once more making right. In other words, these intellectuals, and he's thinking of people, Christians like T.S. Eliot, W.H. Auden, Jacques Maritain, C.S. Lewis, these same intellectuals feared that the eventual Allied victory that was indeed won in 1945 would end up being primarily attributed not to the Allies' higher moral ground of seeking to establish justice and good in the world, but would primarily be attributed to their technological superiority over the Axis powers. One of the thinkers that Jacobs deals with in this book is the late Christian and French philosopher-theologian Jacques Ellul. Like other Christian intellectuals who lived during the war and those post-war years of the 20th century, Ellul had worries about the character and outcome of the French Allied victory, and he was a member of the French resistance against the Nazis. Ellul thought that though the Allies had been materially triumphed, he worried that they were actually spiritually dead and defeated. It's a pretty stark way to think about the Allied victory. Why think that? Ellul recognized that the emerging post-war victors seemed to be mainly concerned with what he called technical tasks. What's wrong with technical tasks? Is he against development and use of technology? No, not necessarily. In his book, Presence in the World, Ellul writes the following, quote, "This does not mean the technical work should not be done or that it's useless. No, the point is that everyone does this kind of work. But it has no meaning if it's not guided and accompanied and sustained by another work, one that Christians alone can do and yet often do not do. For the world must be preserved by the ways of God and not by the technique of human beings, although technique can enter into the ways of God if we are careful to hold it under his judgment and submission," end quote. Ellul came to see this idea of technical work, or what he often just calls technique, as dominating all of Western life. Again, Ellul was not against technology or the development or employment of technology per se, but like Wendell Berry, Ellul was concerned about a certain attitude about technology coming to the fore and dominating Western thought, and he believed that it would have detrimental effects on human beings. Ellul saw this primarily through the new emerging models of education that were coming out after World War II that constantly tied human intellect to ever-growing, ever-diversifying technical expertise. And since educational institutions were also turning into such, Ellul saw that intellectuals were tending to become just merely technicians. He worried that even though technical advances were seeming to increase human possibilities, The scope of human life was actually becoming restricted with this new enthusiasm with technology. In other words, as Alan Jacob words it, Allul worried that the very success of technique was leading to a diminished ability to imagine non-technical action or thought. I think Allul and Berry are onto something, but what exactly was it? Let's try to get at this notion of technique just a little more from Allul. He defined technique as an outlook or a worldview that is essentially committed to efficiency. Allul explained the commitment of efficiency as the desire to maximize productivity and minimize waste, effort, or expense, whether it be resources of time, money, strength. I think Allul correctly saw a new emphasis emerging in Western culture. Think about how often we in our consumer culture today are marketed to with new gadgets, products, and services that promise more efficiency. This new thing will free up your time, save you money, make your life more productive. Now, efficiency clearly has its place. It is a good we often desire. But Allul's point seems to be that technique prizes efficiency above all else. And in doing so, Allul knows that technique often seeks to reduce the qualitative, important aspects of human life to those that are only quantitative, and those result in things that are destructive to human flourishing. Let me try to give a few examples which I think make Allul's point valid. As I already noted, I'm a philosopher by academic training. I actually did my doctoral work in philosophy of logic. I teach logic every spring semester at Bethlehem College, the second semester freshman, and I teach logic the way it's been taught for over 2,000 years, primarily by studying words and sentences. By studying the relationships between propositions that use words like thus and so, I teach students how we're able to see good reasoning, how it should go, and how we should avoid bad reasoning. But most logic courses offered today in colleges and universities do not primarily follow this approach. Rather, logic in most of these courses, and I've taught some of these courses myself, has become a mathematical discipline of reducing natural language to symbols and formula, and then recognizing and performing certain formal manipulations on these formula. Instead of analyzing arguments in natural language, which is the most intuitive and natural thing to do, most logic courses seek to reduce human reasoning to proofs in order to evaluably test arguments as valid or coherent. Mathematical logic is a highly technical field, and it's one I think it's very worthwhile to study for various purposes. But after having seen students become quite adept at formal mathematical logic, when I used to teach this kind of course, I had students that would get A's and B's in these courses. Nevertheless, I can testify that most of these students rarely became better reasoners or thinkers. What they became good at was a technique, the technical manipulation of formula according to certain rules. Studying formal mathematical logic may make someone a good computer programmer, but it does not usually make someone a better everyday human reasoner. Also, as I'll later suggest, technique encourages people to think of vocation primarily in terms of technique or technical expertise. Before entering into academic philosophy, I did my undergraduate degree in theology and my first degree in divinity. So before going to philosophy, I was initially pursuing education in order to be a pastor. And one of the things that was very popular in ministry circles in the 1980s, 1990s, and early aughts, and I suspect this is still true in theology schools today, or many, was that we were encouraged to seek out programs and methods for doing effective what was called church growth. Many of these church growth programs and methodologies I found insightful and helpful for things like evangelism and ministry. But in my experience, I found that one of the expectations that was beginning to be laid on young pastors is that one should primarily seek to be an effective pastor. And in order to do that, it seemed I needed to master certain sociological, psychological, and managerial methods. Now, again, I think there were some helpful things in there for pastors to learn. I'm not completely poo-pooing on those concepts, okay? But in becoming good at these church growth techniques, sometimes things got left behind in the mix. Things like, oh, you should teach good theology, and you might want to be a good shepherd to actual people in the real world. Pastoral preparation was clearly being thought of in terms of what Allul calls technique. It was being presented as a professional vocation that primarily focused upon technical expertise. And I think pastors still feel it today. Like they feel like they have to be experts on like COVID, they have to be experts on social media. There's all these pressures on pastors to have all these expertise. Okay, and this is sort of a long trajectory. And this idea, of course, isn't new. John Piper wrote on this issue 2 decades ago in his book, aptly named "Brothers, We Are Not Professionals." In his 2013 updated version, he wrote the following. He says, "Nothing has happened in the last 10 years to make me think this book is any less needed. In fact, instead of going away, the pressure to professionalize the pastorate has morphed and strengthened. Among younger pastors, the talk is less about therapeutic and managerial professionalization," that was more like my generation, "and is more today about communication or contextualization. The language of professionalization is seldom used in these regards, but the quiet pressure felt by many pastors is, be as good as those professional media folks," end quote. But this phenomenon of professionalization has bled over into all sorts of fields, and I think it's largely due to how technique has become the dominant way of thinking about education, especially higher education. Being involved with student recruitment at Bethlehem, I can tell you that the main question you often hear from prospective students, and almost always from parents, is, what can my kid do with a degree from Bethlehem? Which is a good question. It's not unimportant, but it's unfortunately become the dominant question. And historically, schools were always first and foremost committed to the goal of shaping people for all of life. But for almost 2 centuries now, it's clear that most people think about higher education as simply preparing them for one slice of their life, namely their professional career. And this passive acceptance of critique can be seen even in many of our expectations about other things. It seems to me that we often expect professionalism simply because we cannot fathom a non-technical alternative. For example, when we're experiencing deep and hard struggles in our lives, and we're wise enough to seek out knowing that we need help, what's the first immediate inference most of us make? I need a professional counselor. Now, I praise God for people with such expertise. But what exactly did people do before psychology and biblical counseling degrees? And why do we now immediately think that we need professional experts for any type of perceived need today? Were mentally troubled people completely without hope before Freud came along? I find that hard to believe. And I find it sad that we think that such difficult situations always require technique. Again, the point is here that professional counseling is never a good thing or shouldn't be sought, but it's the immediate thing we seek. Note that none of these examples I've just given rely upon technology per se, or how we usually think of that term, technology. Nevertheless, I think these are all examples of technique in what seems to be, because in what seems to be most highly prized is prized or value is technical mastery. And this is what both Barry and Alul see as problematic for human flourishing. And moreover, it seems to me that this is nothing new. In Genesis chapter 11, we are told about the building of the Tower of Babel, when the whole earth had one language, and when the peoples of the world came together with the following plan. In verse 4, quote, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves," end quote. Given their stated goal, this clearly is not some altruistic feat of engineering, but a hubristic attempt to be like God. And thus we are told a few verses later that Yahweh came down and confused their language, thus the Tower of Babel, such that they could no longer continue to work together and were unable to go on to greater, bolder technological blasphemies. Technique is not new, and as the Bible suggests here, it comes from a deeply problematic place in the human heart. But what does any of this have to do with AI? A recent article reported the following. Suppose I told you that in 10 years, the world as you know it will be over. You'll be in a sort of paradise. You won't get sick of age. You won't die. Eternal life will be yours. Even better, your mind will be blissfully free of uncertainty. You'll have access to perfect knowledge. Oh, and you'll no longer be stuck on earth. Instead, you can live up in the heavens. If I told you all this, the article reports, would you assume that I was a religious preacher or an AI researcher? Either one would actually be a pretty guess nowadays, he says. The more you listen to Silicon Valley's discourse about AI, the more you hear echoes of religion. That's because a lot of the excitement about building a super intelligent machine comes down to a recycled religious idea. Most secular technologies who are building AI just don't recognize that. Now, that may sound like an excerpt from a religious website, but it's actually an article from Vox.com. And I think it shows that many people, including secular people, are seeing something problematic about what the purveyors of AI are seeking to sell us. But as I've been attempting to make the case this evening, AI is not really some drastic new thing, but just the latest unfolding along a long-standing techno-cultural trajectory of what Ellul called technique, a worldview that we've been habituated to and still perpetuate. And if AI is indeed part of this trajectory that focuses so highly upon efficiency, then I think we should pause to think about AI or any sort of type of technique and whether we should or shouldn't be using it in our lives or how we should be using it. So let me close with some suggested responses. What does it mean to be human in the age of AI? Rob Dreher wrote a book a few years ago called The Benedict Option. Am I suggesting the Amish option? I don't think so, okay? Is the answer to try and opt out of using any technology like AI or opt out of learning or relying upon any professional expertise? No, I don't think so. I don't think we have to be that extreme. But I want to suggest, along with Wendell Berry and Jacques Ellul, that we need to resist what we've been passively giving into this culture of technique for some time. And we need to do so by beginning to be more thoughtfully intentional about why and how we use the technologies, services, and institutions that we already now use. L.M. Sakasis, an excellent Christian thinker on society and technology, wrote in a recent article the following. He said, "What would it mean to regain a sense of what it is to be a person, coupled with a subversive practice of the same, within a techno-economic system whose default settings incline us to forget this vital fact about ourselves and our neighbors? What would it mean to reclaim a confidence in what we might be able to do with ourselves and for one another in the face of an array of technologies, services, and institutions that market themselves under the implicit sign of our ostensible helplessness and the inner banner of debilitating liberation?" Along these lines, I'm suggesting here that we begin thinking more intentionally about why and how we use the technologies that we already use. That we should better reflect upon our God-given humanity with choices that better contribute to what it means to truly flourish as God intended. We should be asking questions like the following. Do we always need what is faster or quicker? Are there possible benefits to doing at least some things slower and less efficiently? How might we see the virtues of patience and hard work grow if efficiency isn't always and only thing we value? Perhaps we'll grow in wisdom in doing so. How many of us have traveled around a parking lot for an additional 5 minutes in our car looking for a closer park rather than taking the one that's available and walking an extra 50 yards and burning a few additional calories? Another question, is it always better to make the least expensive choice? Does buying something local, sometimes at a higher price, or having to wait a little longer, have any additional benefits? At Bethlehem College and Seminary, our bookstore manager, Matt Lund, can order you any book you want at prices that usually beat Amazon or at the very least match them. And moreover, every penny of profit at Bethlehem College and Seminary bookstore goes to Bethlehem College and Seminary and not to Jeff Bezos. So why are so many people still using Amazon in our Bethlehem community? Well, Matt Lund can really get you a book in 2 days. Sometimes it takes as long as a whole week. Ooh. I'm sure AI will have many useful benefits, including efficiency. But instead of immediately running to it or any other type of technique, we should ask ourselves, what other costs may we be incurring? And is the goal of efficiency we are achieving really worth those costs? Sometimes it will be, but I'm suggesting that it's not always the case. One last suggestion as a response, and this comes by way of Jacques Ellul again. Let me give that quote that I gave you earlier. He said, quote, "This does not mean that technical work should not be done or that it's useless. No, the point is that everyone does this kind of work, and it has no meaning if it's not guided and accompanied and sustained by another work, one that Christians alone can do and yet often do not. According to the law, what is this one work that Christians alone can do that makes technical work meaningful? This may seem overly simplistic, but a law suggests that Christians need to be primarily about the business of prayer. How does prayer disallow us from making technical work, including working with AI, not become technique, the problematic worldview that goes back to at least to the Tower of Babel? It seems to me that in prayer, we are doing exactly the opposite of what technique is encouraging us not to do. Namely, humble ourselves and rely more upon God. As writer and researcher Matthew Crawford once observed, for several hundred years now, the ideal self of the West has been striving to secure freedom by rendering the external world pliable by its wills. He's right, for that's the way of technique. But prayer for the Christian is not a striving for freedom to enforce our will, but rather prayer is a resting in the freedom and will of Christ. In short, prayer is one of the major ways that makes us more human. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is probably the most intelligent thing I have said this evening. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
So Professor McGlothlin has graciously agreed to take some questions. I'll move around with the microphone, so anybody has a question, raise your hand and I'll bring you the mic.
Thank you so much for your perspective. That was excellent. At the end there, you mentioned considering some of the costs that we pay to gain the technological or the AI advancements. What are some of those costs, in your opinion?
Yeah, good. So these are pretty simple examples, but just think about something just as different as like the difference between microwaving food and taking the time to actually make a meal, right? Now, there's times where microwaving and quick food is good. I mean, we have only so much time, and we're trying to be efficient. But I think one of the things that Lowell and Barry are trying to push is that we make that the status quo now. Like we always want the microwave fast food, and we know that's not. We know there's good evidence that kind of diet's not healthy for us. Okay, so one of the costs that we're giving in efficiency there is health, right? So that's like one simple example. And so a lot of, especially Barry, he's an agrarian writer. A lot of the things he wants to give are sort of agricultural examples, things that, getting back to like growing our own gardens and those sort of things, becoming more efficient, self-efficient in our food supplies. So those are sort of like some basic examples. But I can think of others like I live 2 blocks from my grocery store, and so it's pretty easy for me to walk to Aldi to get things, but oftentimes, I got a car. Why should I walk, But it's like, it'd probably be good for me. Yeah, it's probably going to take me an extra 10, 15 minutes to walk there and back, but sometimes that's probably a good idea. It's not always the smartest to just jump in a car just because I have it. So those are the type of simple things. I think they're just challenges to think about just our everyday uses of technology, such that when a new technology, something like AI comes along, maybe we'll have a better framework. It's like, do I really need it for this? Okay. Because I think there are a lot of bigger issues that I didn't get into tonight about adopting AI that we do need to, but some of these are already indicative of just how online and connected people are. There's all kinds of good evidence already about psychological problems, sociological issues related to this. And I think AI will just exacerbate those, not because the technology is worse, but our attitude towards the technology has the same slovenly willingness that Barry talked about. Is that helpful?
Yeah, maybe could you expand just a little bit on some of the psychological, emotional ones that we're experiencing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on this. Just things I've seen, just like for instance, there's a lot of good evidence coming out now about the effects of COVID on the education system, especially students that are now learning at home online and being secluded from fellow classmates and not socialized. There's all kinds of good evidence coming out that was not good. Now, there's a question about whether it's necessary or not. That's a different issue. But it's just an example of how being secluded online and being disconnected or just relying upon your socialization purely through using technology does seem to have some negative effects. So there's a lot of evidence coming out for those kind of things now, but I'm not an expert on those sort of things. But
Other questions?
Thank you. You mentioned techne in the school system a bit briefly, and so it just got me thinking that what does the school system look like redeemed using technology appropriately? What comes to mind for me is reading, getting back to reading, like something like the great books. But then the other thing that came to mind is like the Montessori style, where it's hands-on, and so yeah, just curious.
what I think about educate.
How do you use technology in an appropriate setting while not letting it, or something that could also come to mind is like grading system as well.
Yeah, good. So I don't have anything concrete to say or specific there either, but it's if we do what I think the schools were traditionally meant to do, think about forming people, then it's an issue about how technology might help that. Okay, and I think it can be helpful. I think AI actually has a lot of, just like internet, unfortunately, I think we primarily just think of it as sort of a porn magnet nowadays, right? It's just been so misused and abused, okay? But it has a bunch of amazing applications when it's used well. I'm sure AI can be that as well. So I think any sort of technology that we're going to, that comes our way, we want to think about, okay, how can this help us in our human endeavors, okay? And specifically in a Christian context, how can this help us in ministry? How can this help us to live the Christian life better? I think those are perfectly, again, we think about technique, it doesn't have to be, we think about computers and gadgets, but think about something as simple like Paul was able to spread the gospel much more easily in his day because of the Roman road system that had been developed. Okay, so there's a type of technology that that the gospel was benefiting from. So there's an example where a type of technology is being used, even though he personally didn't develop it, he was making use of it. So I think thinking about how those things, but we have to be careful there because it's easy to go quickly to pragmatics, right? It's like, well, that's when we start treating our tasks primarily in terms of efficiency. Like, how can we reach the most people in the quickest amount of time, or something like that. So I think there's still dangers there that we have to think through. But at least if we start slowing down and thinking about like what we're called to do in education, we're trying to shape a whole life. We're trying to think about what it is to make a flourishing human society. What's it mean to grow in a flourishing church? Okay, which, by the way, is not just a pastor's job. That's all of our jobs if we're part of a congregation. Those kind of big, broad questions become primary such that the means, such like technologies and all kinds of other things, become more subservient or means secondary to those things. I take it technique is a problem because that's sort of our go-to, right? And we're not thinking very intentionally or carefully about it. We're negligently just too quick. I mean, we have a phrase like we are early adopters, right? The new gadget. Who wants the new gadget? Okay, because the new ESV Bible app is cooler on that, And so I think it's worth thinking like, why do we upgrade to something? Why do we need something? And I think education should approach technology in that way, and then becomes an issue about. And could it be the case that just certain technologies we shouldn't be using at all? I'm sure there is, but I'd have to think through those first. Okay, but I doubt AI is the thing. Okay, even though I think there's a bunch of pitfalls that come with it as well. Yeah.
It seems to me there's a danger of humanity losing its ability to think and reason if we don't. So education would be the place that we would need to still be teaching those things. Mm-hmm. Like, for instance, I remember when we took big math tests when I was in school, you weren't allowed to use a calculator even though they were there, because if you used them, your mind would not know how to actually calculate it yourself, so it wouldn't be much use to you unless you had a calculator. Right. And now I think that's even more prevalent. But we'll lose the ability for mathematics if you can't reason through reading and writing an argument or making a case for something. It seems there's a danger that technology could overtake humanity's ability to be in charge.
Yeah. But that's been going on for a while now, right? As you mentioned, like the calculator example is a perfect example. So L.M. Secostas is the thinker I mentioned there towards the end. He does a lot of good work on this. And the way he words this is that he calls technique this sort of thing. We've been slowly giving up human capacities for a while, okay? Because the point of a tool normally is to save time, work, okay? And there's good reasons, like, I was joking with one of my students here, helped me fix my fence summer before last, and we're digging for the poles, and I would love to have gone and rented a big auger to make those holes, beating these roots and rocks with a shovel. We busted a shovel at one point, So technology is always a means to sort of pass off a competency to something for efficiency, okay? And sometimes it's worthwhile. But the temptation is we're getting newer, better gadgets all the time, and so we've been slowly giving more and more capacities over. We do less and less. I mean, it amazes me when I think about, like, my grandparents, all the things that they could do in terms of cooking, sewing their, darning socks and all those kind of things. I'm completely powerless. I've been subcontracting all that stuff out, through my purchases, right? We were talking about today, like, I could imagine maybe like having a farm someday, but the thought of butchering my own animal just absolutely, I'd have to be like a vegetarian a long time before that sounded like an attractive option. And I love meat, okay, but the idea of butchering, I've just never had an experience with it. So there's a lot of competencies we've slowly been giving over, and not just individually, but as a community. Like, how many people do we know in a community that can go butcher an animal? If we had to, okay? I suppose we'd make a mess of it, okay, and get something on the table, I guess, okay? But this has been part of this long trajectory. We've been giving over competencies for quite a while, and AI is just the next, even scarier step, right? Okay, but people are doing that a lot online now, anyways. Any
questions over here?
Behind you.
They've had all the questions so far. So there's got to be an app you can find it, look up a question with, right? Yeah.
So I'm curious, in The Shallows, Nicholas Carr argues that we are shaped by our technologies, and he points to maps, clocks, and the printed book as major turning points in man's understanding.
Right.
So as you look at AI and all the studies you've done on it, from the current moment, it seems like a paradigmatic shift.
It does. Yeah.
Do you see it as a shift, or do you see it just as an extension of what's come before?
That's a good question. In certain ways, yes. I think it's the whole point of this technique kind of line. I think it's part of that trajectory. But that being said, I do think there are inventions throughout history, and like the printing press is another good example, that have massive implications. But to be honest, right now, everybody's guessing. Okay, and a lot of stuff I'm seeing on the internet right now, the reason I didn't go into a lot of I just mentioned a couple of the deep fake kind of issues, is just, it's all kind of doom and gloom. It is kind of frightening. The people that are actually developing AI are saying, this is dangerous. And you're just like, well, why are you making it, okay? And they all say the same thing. Well, if we don't, the other guy will. It's kind of like an arms race. But it's really a guessing game at this point. So in my ethics class today, we were actually talking about this topic, and we were theorizing, we were wondering, if people get more and more suspicious about online content always being AI, is that going to just make us like maybe disconnect more? Like, we're going to quit looking at the internet. And I was thinking, well, that's maybe not a bad thing, okay? But it's all guesswork because nobody really knows. So I think it is a massive shift. I mean, and it's changing really, really quick. And it's already the scary thing is it's already being implemented in a lot of stuff we're already using. Okay, I got a student, I'll just say his name was Tom, that lived with me a few years ago, a student that rented a room. I've been getting emails recently from my son, Tom McGlothlin, who doesn't exist, to come visit schools, these colleges. So some program somewhere has figured out this young man lived with me at one point and must be my son, and now I'm getting emails generated to me. So, and a lot of people have this experience. Like, you be talking about, Reese's peanut butter cups, and all of a sudden Reese's peanut butter cup ads start popping up. And so this stuff's already being implemented. And those are just kind of marketing ploys at this point. But so I think so, but who knows at this point. And I think we do need to keep our eyes on it. Mm.
There was another one over here.
Thank you. I want to explore that just a little bit and talk about and ask you about, is it necessarily wrong for us to adjust our ethics based on some aspects of our ethics? For example, when I grew up, I think we had spelling tests every week up till 6th grade. I remember having spelling tests every week. I don't think that happens in elementary anymore like that. And the reason is because we have spell check. Now, no one points to you and says, "Did you use spell check, you cheater?" And now that's a very small example, but you fill out and you start writing an email, and the email it starts writing it for you, pieces of it. That's a little longer. Or maybe now you use a little ChatGPT to create a letter. You modify the letter, you put in your own stuff, you change it, but it gets you started in thinking out of the blank paper look, you know. Should we, is it okay to be thinking differently than maybe we did another time? And I want to provide one other example of use. I have helped college professors with technology. One who taught English composition asked me a question. It said, I have an ESL student whose the assignment for English composition was to write a paper, of course. Write the paper. Well, he did it in his native tongue, translated it using the internet, used Grammarly to then smooth it out, readjust it, did this transparently for the teacher, told the teacher that they did this. Teacher found this to be unethical. Now, I thought at first, wait a minute, we're thinking very monolinguistic here. Shouldn't we be switching, changing, and thinking differently? And the answer, and she persuaded me, was this is English composition. This isn't write a paper course. It's English composition. It was a different way to think about it.
Right.
So all right, so a big framework, but that's ethics.
That last caveat's really good. So I think, so those are perfect examples of technology we're already using, right? And so what's problematic about that, right? And the response is, it may not be at all. So we're asking, what are we giving up? What are we losing by now letting spell check do all our spelling for us, okay? Maybe not much, okay? I suspect we're losing more than we realize. I think it'd be worth thinking more about. I'd like to hear people that do work in that, what they say. But I think any kind of technology we adopt, there's some kind of cost. And so sometimes the cost worth it. I mean, that example you were giving with the student that used grammar, my first thought was like, that seemed okay to me until the point, it's mainly a writing course, it's mainly trying to teach English. Okay, that makes a difference. But I could see in a writing course, you're trying to write a paper to teach how to write papers, I could see why it'd be problematic to let those same tools be used. So I think it's an issue of thinking about what are we wanting, okay? What things are we valuing, okay? And technology does make a difference to ethics. Just to give you an example. Euthanasia only became a debate in the past 100 years because of technology. Because 100 years ago, you quit breathing, your heart quit beating, and you quit talking all about the same time. And now we have machines that can keep different things going. And so the technology actually has made euthanasia an issue, okay? So technology does have implications for how we think through how wisdom gets applied, okay? But I do think that I want to encourage us to go softly, okay, intentionally. Not that, I'm not encouraging a Luddite thing here that we get rid of all our spell checkers or anything like that. I was already writing, I was part of the generation that was not using computers and started using computers in graduate school, so I'm kind of a pre-spell check guy, okay? But I really like Google Gmail that kind of spits out words for me. That makes, because I write a lot of emails, and it's kind of nice to have that computer. Now, it gets it wrong most of the time, and I type it anyways, okay? But sometimes it gives me a good say, yeah, that's me. I'm going for it. So I think there's some goods to these technologies, but we have to think through what might we be losing, and the gains we're getting, are they worth the loss? That's all I'm recommending. Yeah, good example.
how do you think AI will handle the truth? Say, for example, Genesis 1:1. Will it take a position on that?
I'm sure ChatGPT will give you a position on it. But again, as well, I was trying to make a point about it's basically a function machine. It's still not something that comes from genuine intelligence. It's just an algorithm that's able to give very human-like responses based on its speed and its versatility, the amount of information it can assess. Okay, but I personally, I've ever seen people kind of asking these existential questions. Well, I've been doing this with Alexa and Siri for a while too. Like, is there a God and things like this. But I don't see why we should seriously use those for any kind of. And also, there's a lot of biases, clearly, depending on what's programmed into them. So there's this thing called trolley car experiments that ethicists do, that like things like the following: if 5 people are on one track and only one person on the other track, and this train's coming down, and you have the ability to switch the track to where it's going to hit the 1 or the 5, what's the ethical thing to do? And there's this kind of trolley car experiments. Some of these have come out with some really ridiculous responses on these trolley car examples. And I have a friend who works in the corporate world, and they're using AI all the time now, but he says sometimes they're getting really bizarre stuff out of it. A lot of times it's doing like really producing good work for them, but sometimes they'll just give these like weirdo stuff out of blue that they don't know why. And I even heard, my wife was telling me about a law firm, or I can't exactly what the context was, that was doing the hard work of just looking up cases to cite cases, which sounds like a Google search or something like that. And someone went back and did the work of checking, and the program had actually been making up some of the cases. And they still don't know why. There's some kind of fluke that they're going to try to weed out. So, yeah, I would not be too. I think they're funny. I had a friend. Her name's Lydia McGrew. She actually just recently asked GBT, "Who's Lydia McGrew?" And it gave a pretty good job description of her. And she said, "I like this. I'm going to put this on my CV." And she got it from ChatGPT. So, but I personally wouldn't care less what it says about deep, meaningful questions. What do you think about Genesis 1:1 or whatever?
Maybe one more from the audience, and we've got a reception. Anybody? One more question?
Over.
Thank you. One topic I think I've seen in the headlines about AI lately is AI-generated artwork. I
didn't hear you.
AI-generated artwork.
Oh, yeah.
Poetry or simulations of paintings or whatever. Given what you said about that an AI lacks true understanding and the point of the Chinese room thought experiment, how do you think that limitation of artwork affects, or limitation of AI would affect artwork produced by AI?
Well, like how would it translate over to that problem?
Yeah, would there be a substantial difference between artwork generated by human intelligence and artwork generated by AI that's imitating intelligence?
Good. That's actually, I think, a really good question. I would imagine that's going to have to take someone with some real art expertise to get into that. Because I've already played with some of those online. Done sort of kind of like Tolkien-esque kind of little goofy stuff, and they're pretty amazing what it does. Okay, I've been pretty impressed with them. But I'm also a dilettante in terms of art. I mean, it looks good to me, but I don't know if it would fool anybody who's a real. Like, you ever seen these Jackson Pollock is this famous abstract. He did these paint drippings, and I've seen those, and I've seen like fake Pollocks, and for the life of me, I can't tell the difference. But people who know Jackson Pollock know immediately when something's just a fake. And so I think we'd probably need to bring in expertise of people who know art really well to see what they would say to that. I would like to think that the Chinese thought experiment, Chinese room argument, has bearing on that as well, but I have to think more about that. Because in the end of the day, it still has to be generated by functions. Okay, it's taking certain input, and then because of its ability to amass this information quickly the way AI can, it's just giving an output based on that. So at the end of the day, it still has to be that. But that being said, it still does some pretty amazing things. And it's been doing kind of weird things, too. I saw this recent article that some AI keeps putting this weird woman in the background of all these art, and she's creepy looking. And so it was like, is she a demon? I was like, I don't know what she looks like one. Okay, it's kind of a creepy thing. But they don't know why the AI keeps putting this woman and all these. But those kind of flukes are coming out. Or have you seen like this was before ChatGPT, these photograph generators that look like photographs from like the 60s and 70s, but for some reason they were making like people with 6 fingers. And that was like the only thing you'd really catch that, oh, it's actually fake, you know. So I imagine we're going to need more expertise for people in those fields to help us think through those issues. Good question.
So I'll take the privilege of the microphone to ask one of my own.
Sure.
This idea of functionalism, and then the intersection between reasonable efficiency and integrity. Mm-hmm. That seems like that's going to be an increasingly more difficult intersection to discern.
Yeah.
And what informs it.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have to be thinking about other virtues than just efficiency. So the only way you can think about use the phrase reasonable efficiency, temperate efficiency. Only way we're going to think about what it means to wisely choose efficiency is take into account other sort of things like, is this just? Is this loving? And I think about the fruits of the Spirit here. Is this kind? You know, are we being patient? Okay. And you see how like efficiency can really just baldly go against some of those things, right? So I think it's a matter of wisdom calls, I think, in terms of how we're trying to think about how we're going to apply efficiency. Because efficiency is good. Anybody that has a small business will tell you it needs to be efficient, right? Or it's not going to sustain itself. But the problem with technique is that it's just the only virtue or the primary virtue. So I think that whatever category we think of as wise efficiency or good efficiency or reasonable efficiency is going to have to take into account other sort of virtues as well, other kind of things that we know are clearly good and moral and valuable to balance them.
Well, Professor, know that you are a gift and a treasure to
Thank
us
you.
at Bethlehem College and Seminary. Let's express our gratitude.
Thank you for coming.